The second turbo boost is on the horizon, and with it we will get amazing changes to the game, changes that revived the game last patch mid-season, something that never really happened. But what else could the game get permanently if only the devs would rip the cord? Let's check out the top 5 things that are a crime for not being a permanent addition to World of Warcraft. Number 1 are clearly the dinars, or puzzling cartel chips, or whatever this season's name for them will be. Not necessarily these in particular, but rather what they represent, which is a way to deterministically get a piece of item if enough effort is put into obtaining it. Dinars were their initial name when they came in Shadowlands, and that's what people got to know them as, but they are basically a currency you farm to spend on the exact item you want. Now, it can be problematic if this system was unrestricted and permanently up, since everyone would just buy the exact item they want. And I want you to actually think about what I just said and how weird it sounded to call it a problem, getting the item that you want. The RNG aspect of the game is fine and should still remain, but the fact that so many people resonate with a system that rewards their efforts fairly makes it so wild that the devs keep refusing to implement at least a version of it that makes it impossible for people to run the same dungeon 50 times and not get the trinket they want. Not only should they get the item they want, they should get all of the items after so many runs. People keep resonating with patches in the game where there was a gear vendor of any kind that made their farm and grind worth it in the end. Maybe we need a way to convert undesirable items into a currency that can be used to get the items that we do want. Maybe content should reward us with currencies that, after farming it for enough weeks, we can just get the item that never dropped. Sometimes it feels like the loot system is definitely playing a gambling game with us with how much RNG there is. First, there's a level of RNG whether the item drops or not. Then it is the RNG of whether the item is dropping from the right boss or dungeon. Since we know that if you loot in one of the 5 dungeons you are about to do and the dungeon is not where you want the loot from, the chances you will get an item in the next one, if that's your goal, are almost 0. Same with raid. If the second boss drops an item for you but you wanted it from the third, what are the chances you will win 2 rolls back to back? That sounds fair. It sounds like what RNG loot is in a game, or, you know, how a slot machine works. But then you have another RNG layer on top of this, which is the right item dropped out of all of the items available in a loot table. Because I cannot tell you how many times it happened to raid with a guild with 1 male class and have 2 or more of the same male item drop from the same boss, or have no hunters in our raid and have 3 bows drop in a raid, while your warrior is still waiting for a 2-handed sword. Too bad that RNG went into a bow nobody will use. And lastly, the worst offender is the Great Vault, which is actually worse than what we had in the past expansion when we had the extra loot coin we could roll. At least the coin could be used on the boss we wanted. Granted, it can reward you with gold or artifact power, but at least it gave you some semblance of agency and control when you aimed for the loot table you wanted. The Great Vault is all RNG, and the most egregious kind. You have 3 slots that all can roll random items. It's supposed to mitigate the potential bad feeling of clearing the raid or dungeons multiple times by giving you another chance at an item. It may seem like a big system since you can have up to 9 choices, but really it's 1 item and you have 9 chances for it to be something you are okay with from the loot pool of probably over 100 items. Unless you have a whole bunch of options, all be rings and belts and wrists for 4 to 5 weeks in a row. Oh, you think I'm exaggerating for the fun of it? You must have not heard of Marcelian, the Lord of Bracers, who last season had almost 2 months of nothing but bracers in the vault, and last I checked, his character had only 2 arms. All of this to say how poorly implemented is the gearing system that does so little to make people feel their effort is rewarded as opposed to their good luck being rewarded. It is a lot of optics, but in the end, the feeling you are left with at the end of the day is the feeling that decides if you come back to play tomorrow. The second thing is warbound valorstones. Being already capped at 2000, which some would argue is a worse offense than them not being warbound at all, makes managing a pool of valorstones terribly tedious, especially for people playing multiple characters. The warband and warbound items is maybe the best feature that the War Within brought since probably the introduction of duo class specializations. But the gating and restrictions on it feels like we are hungry gamers being fed breadcrumbs through a straw, just enough to spike our appetite to make sure we come back like good little addicts. This could be extended to crests as well, but valorstones feel so universal, so useless, and yet so gatekeeping, not tied at all to any of the difficulty of the content that they are used to upgrade the items from, that making them transferable permanently sounds like a no-brainer. Speaking of, number 3 is definitely uncapped crests. Together with the previous two, all of these are now turbo boost features that have proven to be incredibly successful. I understand why crests are capped. We don't want to force people to spam Mythic Plus dungeons week 1 and get max eye level within a few days. But there are already so many barriers to obtaining gear that makes it easy for people who don't deserve the gear to not get it. aka, normal raiders cannot get fully upgraded myth track gear no matter how much they farm a normal raid. Same with key pushers that can actually barely get any myth gear to begin with unless they raid. But if someone can spam, let's say 50 dungeons at plus 12 in the first week, is it weird if they got max high level gear? Why is max high level gear, regardless of upgrades track, a time-gated system and not a gameplay-gated system? Why are we nerfing people who can play the game for the sake of people who cannot play the game, since this would be the argument against uncapped crests? We don't want people who cannot play as much to feel like they are left behind. But then, what's the point in playing all the time if you cannot get more power into your character? There are definitely pros and cons to both sides of the discussion here, but it's hard not to feel like the devs are telling us how to have fun and play the game properly. It feels like the devs are that person holding on the leash of a dog that keeps pulling at it. I guess the analogy is not really correct because the dog wants to run around and maybe be inappropriate in a social settings, while we are trying to have fun in the game. Or maybe it's the right analogy. The fourth thing is the removal of gated story and general character progression within a patch. I am talking about waiting a week for a chapter story, waiting a week for a game system to enable because it is too soon for me to experience it? Why? I am curious if a game design decision that takes away fun and gameplay can reason and be explained to a customer paying for a game without making it sound like it's engagement metrics at play here. A patch comes out with a new story about interesting characters and I want to find out what it does, but I can only do so in episodes, so that the cast has time to film the next one for next week because they signed a contract with a TV network. Only that in WoW's case the story is done, there is no TV network, only the need to extend the game experience from players for as long as a time frame as possible. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the recurring monthly subscription we are paying. And 5, we need to be able to trade gear regardless if it is an upgrade for us or not. I'm sure everyone has been in this situation where we run a dungeon with friends and an item drops for you that is the wrong stat or the wrong type of trinket, but an actual bis for your friend, but you cannot trade it. Why? Isn't it my item to do with it what I want? Why, when the dungeons are so restricted, do we have this happen when in raids we can trade however we want? For a game that pretends it wants people to socialize and form groups to run content with, it sure as hell doesn't feel like it when I loot a one-hander on my Fury Warrior when I want a two-hander, but my tank friend that can use the one-hander has to watch me vendor it. Who is this system making happy at this point? This particular point also kind of goes hand in hand with the disappearance of personal loot in raid. It combines into an overall bigger game design problem where decision is taken out of the player's hand regarding what to do with their loot and instead stealthily orchestrated by the devs into a direction that upsets as few people as possible that had no stakes in another person's loot. It just feels weird. The whole theme of this top 5 is player agency being restricted by the system, which exists in every video game, sure, to a degree, yet in WoW it's like a hot potato that is used to exploit player engagement. Or at least that's how it feels. Maybe we missed one and would be curious to know what game feature that exists occasionally should be made permanent that you can think of that we should have included. This video has been made possible thanks to our patrons, with a link to our page in the description if you enjoyed this type of video. Or maybe you just want to know how to play Fury Warrior. Luckily, we already have a video on it right here that you can check out for some easy talent builds rotations to get you slapping those blade storms.